Guy here with a quick message before we get on with the pod. As a thank you to our most dedicated and loyal viewers and listeners to Blood Red, we're inviting you to join our Blood Red Club. By joining, you'll get access to insider transfer content, as well as interviews with former favourites and those connected at Anfield. All you need to do is head to bloodredpodcast.co.uk, enter your email address, and our exclusive content will head to your inbox. That's bloodredpodcast.co.uk. Thanks. Now on with the show.
Hello and welcome to the latest podcast from the Blood Red channel. I'm Matt Addison and we've got something slightly different for you in the works today. A look back at a transfer that never was. Wind back to 2018 and Liverpool spent more in the transfer market than they ever had done before. Backed in part by the £143 million deal that saw Philippe Coutinho move to Barcelona 6 months earlier, though £75 million of that had of course been spent on Virgil van Dijk. Liverpool then went and bought Alisson Becker, Fabinho, Naby, Keita and Xherdan Shaqiri for a combined total of around £170 million. But they could very easily have spent another £52 million, considering of course they had been minutes away from signing French attacking midfielder Nabil Fekir. The then Lyon man had everything in place for a transfer to happen, and he'd even done the signing on video with Liverpool's in-house media team. But then news of a knee problem arrived and the deal was called off. Liverpool didn't move for an alternative number 10, and in fact, they've never consistently played with one since. Talk of a Coutinho replacement continues, but Liverpool have since moved down a very different tactical path, all because this transfer deal collapsed at the 11th hour. To get the lowdown on Fekir's transfer that never was, and what's happened to him and Liverpool since, I'll soon be joined by Kristian Walsh, who was working as a journalist for the ECHO at the time, then Spanish football writer Andrew Miller, who specialises in Real Betis, the club that Fekir plays for now. And finally, Jonathan Johnson, a French football expert, to get the view from Lyon. Enjoy. And I'm joined first by Kristian Walsh, who was working on the ECHO sports desk at the time that the deal broke down. And Kristian, it must have been a really weird transfer to cover. It was so close to being done, but then it was off.
Yeah, I think what people forget about the Fekir deal is that it was a bit of a saga before it turned into the saga that we're talking about now. There'd been weeks of back and forth. Jean-Michel Aulas, the Lyon president, he's obviously notorious for the way he conducts business very publicly. It was becoming a real sort of tug of war between the player. We knew about the interest in Fekir for quite a while before. But then, as things do sometimes with transfers, it seemed to click. Everything seemed to be ready. Everything was agreed. And as you say, very, very, very strange. Simply because I've never really been involved in a football transfer where it's broken down at the very, very last minute. I mean, we've all seen the pictures that have been leaked. We've all heard the stories about how close he was to actually being unveiled as a Liverpool player. For all intents and purposes, we had stories and contents and back pages ready to go to herald them as Liverpool's new signing, that the Coutinho replacement that they've been after for 6 months, all of that kind of thing, and for it to break down in such spectacular fashion out of the blue. It happened on a Saturday night, and it came from Lyon on an official statement on their website. Completely flummoxed Liverpool. Completely flummoxed us as journalists. No problem holding my hands up with that one. And from there, it was just very much, what's happened? Why has this happened? What's next? And it was, as you say, very, very strange time for Liverpool.
I think it's really interesting as well because Liverpool have moved in a completely different direction, almost by accident, really. They don't really have a number 10 anymore. They didn't sign anybody in his place. We praise Liverpool so much for being so meticulous with their planning, but this was just completely by chance, really.
Absolutely. It's interesting to think about how the team would have been with Fekir compared to what happened without him. I think probably the closest comparison of a player who would subsequently join Liverpool is probably Shaqiri. Left-footed, could potentially play central, but even then, it never really felt like that was what Liverpool were going for with Fekir. It always felt like Fekir was very much the newest member of the Fab Four with Mane, Salah, and Firmino. So it's interesting to think about what it would have looked like. I think it's an interesting angle to think about. Maybe Keita would have been a brand new signing there as well. How does he fit in with Nabil Fekir? What does that midfield look like? does Fabinho come in? He was already in, so is it a Fabinho, Fekir, maybe Keita midfield? What does that mean for Jordan Henderson? Where does Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, of course, recovering from his knee injury still, and he would do for the rest of that campaign? But where does he fit into this? Then you've got James Milner. So it's very, very interesting because he was seen as a traditional number 10. There were whispers that he could have been of number 8 for Liverpool in the Wijnaldum, another name I've forgotten, of course. How can you forget Genie? But the whispers he could be like that. There were whispers he could potentially play as a false 9 and be a bit of a backup for Firmino, that he could do something out wide. So I think his versatility was interesting. It would have been it's an interesting experiment, really, of what would have happened if he would have joined, if Liverpool would have transitioned into the team that they were, because I think if you think back to the 17-18 season, very much a team who could play on the counter-attack. They broke with pace. I think that's why we saw, to be honest, Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain do so well up until his injury. So it's an interesting sort of viewpoint on how Fekir would have actually fit in there.
And in terms of the price as well, I mean, 52 million, that would have made him pretty much the joint third highest transfer Liverpool have ever made. I mean, this was one that they'd really gone all in for, because Liverpool don't do that particularly frequently.
Absolutely. They'd obviously decided that they were going to strengthen, given what had happened in the season before. And they, as you say, they went for it. But in true Liverpool fashion, they, similar to what happened with Van Dijk, for example, they didn't get their man. They'd identified this player as somebody who could do a particular function for them. They were never going to go for the next best thing. They essentially moved on. I don't feel like they reinvested the money that summer. I think there was still a lot of clamour around, well, what's going to happen now? Who's going to replace Philippe Coutinho? You still haven't replaced them. Why is this happening? And so for Keita to sort of just be gone, that left a sort of a £50 million hole, well, not a hole in the pocket, but essentially still burning in the back pocket. So yeah, it sort of was a testament of how Liverpool did business, very similar to when they couldn't get Van Dijk, or well, it spectacularly collapsed in the summer of 2017. They didn't panic. They didn't go out and spend 40 million on a player who wasn't really suited to them. They essentially bided their time, and probably what they then decided was that the solution wasn't to throw that money at a player of a substandard level, but it was essentially to slightly tweak what they were doing, change the way that they played, and probably led to the team that we sort of fell in love with over the past couple of seasons. So it is a very surreal sliding doors moment for Liverpool. And to be honest, a period of them, you think about Julian Brandt instead of Mohamed Salah. You think of what happens if Van Dijk does fall through and they never get Virgil van Dijk. You think about Loris Karius in Kiev, and if that means that Alisson Becker ends up coming that summer. It is a team that has been built fantastically well, but it's certainly not been without its potential pitfalls in that building. So another one to write down as a sliding doors moment, which Liverpool, arguably, given how Fekir has done since, he's doing okay, of course. First at Lyon and then Betis, but Liverpool have certainly come out the better of that deal, given that they were European champions and Premier League champions within 24 months.
Yeah, absolutely. Kristian Walsh, thank you very much. Well, the transfer that never was for Liverpool, a year later, Fekir moved to Real Betis for around £17 million. About a third of the money the Reds were set to part with. My next guest, Andrew Miller, covers the La Liga side, and he gave me the lowdown on how Fekir has been getting on in Spain. I'm now joined by Spanish football writer and Real Betis expert Andrew Miller to talk about the stage of Fekir's career that unfolded as a result of that move to Liverpool breaking down. Andrew, thank you for joining me, and I guess the first question should really be just how good has Fekir been at Real Betis, and how has he found that move?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Matt. I guess there's almost two sides to that question. I guess, overall, he's been one of the best players in this squad easily for the last two seasons. I think, he has an ability to, sometimes it feels like just flip a switch and sort of take over a game, like very few players in the league really have. And of course, that's been a huge boost to Betis. I think on the other hand, sometimes it can feel, at times like he's maybe trying to force it a little too much, trying to take on 3 or 4 defenders at any one time, eventually losing possession, which is particularly detrimental to a squad like Betis, who are very susceptible on the counter. But he also has a tendency to hit shots from distance. If things aren't quite going his way, which can be sometimes a gift or a curse. He has a fantastic left foot, as obviously Lyon fans will know, and he's proven that he does have an ability to score from those spots. But more often than not, it'll go wide or over the bar, and sometimes it feels like a bit of a wasted opportunity. He struggled a little bit at the start of the season, but I think he ended up being one of the biggest factors in Betis securing Europa League football this year. So, he's definitely still capable of stepping up in the key moments. I'd say overall, he's done about as well as expected. There are obviously a number of sort of external factors that can influence a player's performance. La Liga was a new environment for him. It was a new country, a new language, a new squad, a new playing style, and an inconsistent one at that. This is now his third manager in 2 years. So, I think it potentially would have been unrealistic to think that he could come in and, immediately hit that same level that he did at Lyon. But, you can definitely still see that there's a world-class player in there somewhere.
How much excitement was there when he signed for Betis? I mean, he was obviously so close to that Liverpool move. Did that sort of increase the feeling within the fans that they'd got a really top player here?
Yeah, of course. He was and he still is a big name in European football. And I think, when a club in the position of Betis at that time can pull off a deal for, a World Cup winner and arguably the prime years of his career, injury or no injury, it's something that's guaranteed to get the fans going. He joined at a really interesting time. The club were going through a pretty huge transition after, recently having sacked Quique Setien. They spent a huge amount of money on signing Borja Iglesias from Espanyol. They just hired Rubi, who was, this exciting and up-and-coming manager in Spanish football. And it felt like a big statement of intent at the club. They were no longer going to settle for always being perceived as the kind of underachievers in Seville. And that was the deal that moved the needle for them. And of course, it brought a huge amount of optimism and excitement around it. Any player linked with the likes of Liverpool and Arsenal, and he was linked with Real Madrid and Barcelona at the time as well. And and then he shows up at Real Betis. It's something the fans can really, really get behind, of course.
Has there been any sort of signs of those underlying injury issues? That was obviously the reason the deal broke down, but it doesn't look like it's really been too bad for him.
No, he's had a couple of muscular problems, but nothing in comparison to his time at Lyon. I think, if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head, he's missed maybe 10 or 11 games. And of course, the biggest factor in that move to Liverpool breaking down in 2019 was the ongoing concern around his knee. And obviously the ACL injury that he sustained, 5 or 6 years ago now. Doesn't seem to really have bothered him since moving to Spain. His hamstrings has kept him out here and there, but really he's had a relatively clear bill of health over the last 2 seasons. And of course, it's rare to find a footballer nowadays that doesn't miss a handful of games for whatever reason. And I'd say Fekir falls into that category. He's not. I wouldn't say he's injury prone, but obviously he's not perfect. As I say off the top of my head, I think maybe 10 or 11 games in the last 2 seasons he's missed, which is perfectly acceptable. Betis do have a very successful and reputable medical team, I would say. Particularly in rehabilitating players that have gone through a more serious injury, something like an ACL. So I think that's obviously been a big help to him. And the club haven't needed to rush him back. They have been careful to try not to re-aggravate any injuries that he does sustain. So I would definitely say the concerns that Liverpool had previously and probably other clubs had as well. Looking back at the last 2 seasons, I would say that's probably cleared up a fair amount of concern.
You mentioned Real Madrid and Barcelona were interested. Obviously, the reason we're sort of doing the podcast is because Liverpool were as well. But to end up then at Real Betis, it's not quite the same level of club. I think it's fair to say. I mean, was it just a case of them seeing an opportunity? It was, I think, 17 million or so. Liverpool had agreed 52 million. Was it just an opportunity for them to get a player that maybe they wouldn't have ordinarily been able to get? Yeah,
I mean, I think there was a few elements that factored into the move. Betis had just recently bought and sold Giovanni Lo Celso. In the space of 1 season, they turned a huge profit on him. And I think they probably viewed Nabil Fekir as a candidate to do something similar. They knew he was highly coveted by a lot of big clubs, as you say, Liverpool, a lot of clubs in the Premier League, Real Madrid, Barcelona. They knew his time at Lyon was over. They obviously saw an opportunity there to get him for a lower price, and they knew that they could very much put him in the shop window potentially for a bigger move down the line. And I think from the player's side, he saw the Liverpool move break down very publicly, and I think no matter how much self-confidence or self-belief you have, that's of course is going to have an effect on your mentality. So I think potentially the prospect of moving to one of the best supported clubs in a top 3 or 4 league, depending on your perception, it was a good way for him to hit the refresh button. He knew he would be still playing against the likes of Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atleti, Sevilla, and he'd have a chance to show them that he was still a player that can perform at the highest level. And I think there was probably an element of proving anyone wrong that had doubted him as well. But of course, it was a surprise to see him move to the club. But I think it was a good opportunity for both sides to sort of mutually benefit from that.
Was there any sort of risk at all, do you think, with that transfer? I mean, I assume 17 million, even though it was, a third or so of what the player was valued a little bit earlier in his career. I mean, was there still a bit of a risk? Because I suppose that's still probably quite a big sort of transfer fee for Betis to put down.
Yeah, of course. And especially given the checkered injury history from Lyon, there of course was going to be an inherent amount of risk on the club side. They do tend to be quite a careful club when it comes to finance, especially in recent years when Harrow and the new board took charge. But this move was the 4th largest in the club's 100-year history. So immediately there's going to be a huge amount of pressure to ensure that they can make a return on that investment, both on a performance level and on a sort of return on investment financial level. They paid 28 million euros for Borja Iglesias in the same month. So straight away the club put themselves under massive pressure to make sure that they could perform on the pitch. It was the highest individual spending transfer window they'd ever had. So the guys like Nabil Fekir and Borja Iglesias, straight away there's a huge amount of pressure there. So of course any transfer is going to be a risk, but if you really put yourself outside of your comfort zone and break a transfer policy that tends to be quite careful, then of course there's going to be a huge amount of risk there.
Is he a player that they've kind of built around? Is he the sort of number 10, the key creator within the Betis team at this moment?
Yeah, he's definitely the kind of driving force creatively and in the attack. Positionally, it's probably been 50-50 either as a number 10 through the middle or out on the right hand side. Certainly his first season under Ruby, he started most games on the right hand side of a sort of attacking midfield 3. He tended to cut inside. He had sort of freedom to roam across the line in behind the striker, but Betis tend to stick to a sort of 4-2-3-1. They've got very, very high pressing wing backs, so usually when he's deployed further out wide, it sort of increases his defensive responsibility, which often last season it felt at times like it was really limiting his impact on the game. He was further out of the action. He was having to cover for the wing backs when they were pushing forward. This season it's been a little bit different. Manuel Pellegrini's given him a little bit more freedom to express himself, I think more similar to his role at Lyon and with France. He's got a really good relationship with Betis' best player in Sergio Canales. They're both sort of natural number 10s, but they have this almost synergy that they're comfortable switching sides. They create little pockets of space for one another. They've got a nice give and go in the final third, and I think Fekir's really started to sort of flourish and benefit from that space that creates. Something he maybe didn't quite have as much last season. Canales was playing in a deeper midfield role last season, so he was a bit more out of the creative side of it. But he tends to be a comfortable player in sort of any role they put him in. They haven't done it very often, but he has moved up front a couple of times as well, and I know he had done that for Lyon previously, and they've tried it a couple of times late in games and he's done well. So the versatility side of it is certainly something that'll attract other clubs and bigger clubs, and obviously would have been something that attracted the likes of Liverpool previously as well, that he does have an ability to play in a multitude of positions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was linked with Arsenal just a couple of months or so ago. Do you think there's any sort of chance that he might leave Betis, and would the Premier League suit him, do you think? Obviously Liverpool were interested, so they thought he probably would, but do you reckon that's a move that could happen at some point? Yeah,
I mean, it sort of felt, from day one that he wasn't going to be here for the long term, that it probably would have been a sort of shorter term move. And I think for the right price, Betis would be open to selling him. Of course, they've just secured a Europa League group stage spot this season, so keeping hold of their best players has been one of the sort of focal points in the recruitment strategy this season. But they're a realistic club. They know that he was never going to be there for the long term. They know that he had aspirations of moving to a bigger club or a bigger league. Betis had discussions with Barcelona last January before they signed Martin Braithwaite. They were looking for an emergency signing. They couldn't come to an agreement, but that was more down to the sort of financial mess that Barcelona were and are still in. But I would say if he doesn't move this summer, I would probably expect this upcoming season to be his last with Betis. As I say, he has huge aspirations of playing in the Premier League. I don't think the club would stand in his way if the right offer came in. The style suits him. He's incredibly technically gifted. He's not afraid of a physical battle. He likes to sort of get down and dirty in the getting forward and battling defenders and things. So I think testing himself in a place like England and obviously a huge club like Arsenal that have such a sort of rich history with French players in particular, it's always going to be an attractive prospect for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew Miller, Spanish football writer, thanks so much for your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me on that.
And I'm joined last but not least by French football journalist Jonathan Johnson to get the view from France on the transfer move for Nabil Fekir that never was. Jonathan, how good was Nabil Fekir and how close do we think he was to sort of signing for Liverpool and making that transfer?
Well, Fekir was always a player with a massive amount of talent. Obviously, it's a shame what's happened to him over the years through injury. But, he is somebody who was of interest to a lot of the top clubs across Europe. And there was a time where I was approached by Liverpool to talk about the player with a proposed move in the offing, which obviously never came to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the sort of position of the player, he was kind of a number 10 really for Lyon. Did he play anywhere else? Because we haven't really seen Liverpool play with a number 10 since that deal broke down.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen him play across the, pretty much everywhere across the attack. But number 10 was, his real preferred position. He wasn't sort of as versatile as a Houssem Aouar, who can sort of play in central midfield when he's motivated. Fekir was sort of exclusively an attacking player. And although you could, coax some good things out of him when you played him wide, I think he always needed that license to roam in the middle and, was very much a number 10 player.
Liverpool don't tend to spend huge amounts of money on transfers. Of late, they've spent sort of 30 to 40 million quite frequently, but not really too often more than that. I mean, this was going to be a 52 million pound transfer, which is, it would have been the joint third highest transfer that Liverpool had ever made. I mean, was he worthy of that sort of fee, do you think? And were Liverpool right to be looking at him and thinking of him in that kind of bracket?
I think without taking into account the concerns over his injuries, particularly his knee, he was, in terms of his talent, he was definitely worthy of that sort of price tag. Just unfortunately, when you have those serious concerns about a player injury-wise, it's then very difficult to justify that sort of expenditure. I mean, especially now, any sort of player with even half of the injury concerns that a player like Fekir has, clubs would be pulling the plug on that sort of deal. So for Liverpool to look at it even back then, to come so close to completing it and then to decide, actually, we're not quite sure if he's going to be able to handle the rigours of Premier League and Champions League football on a regular basis. That was quite a call because there were a lot of clubs interested in him at that time. But I would also say that Liverpool losing interest or that deal falling apart, also caused a lot of clubs across Europe to, think twice about making a move for Fekir. And with all due respect to Real Betis, a club who plays some fantastic football, that's why they were able to land somebody of Fekir's talent.
I mentioned before that Liverpool didn't sign another number 10. They haven't signed another number 10 since. I mean, what does that say to you, do you think? Does it say that Fekir was just such a good fit and a good level that Liverpool decided to go for him and there wasn't really anybody else out there that they thought was similarly worthwhile going for? Or do you think it was just pure chance that the deal broke down? They've decided to go a different way with that system and formation?
Yeah, very possibly. It could be that there was a change in tack in terms of the tactical approach. It could also be that they just felt that he was such a unique talent there are very few sort of real out and out number 10s, in the game, or there are fewer and fewer now. And Fekir, on his day when he's fit and in form, is one of those players. So I think it was definitely the opportunity to land somebody like him. I mean, Lyon, they're a big club in France, but obviously they've been up against it the last few years, particularly as PSG have been so dominant domestically. Lille have encouraged the domestic competition with last season's title win. But, Lyon still sell a lot of their top youth academy talent. So when somebody, that gifted, that technically brilliant comes through the ranks, it's normal that so many European clubs are interested in potentially signing him up. And I think it was just the fact that he was such a gifted player in such a unique position. And it was really an opportunity that couldn't be refused until they were made aware of his injury record.
I mean, there was some quotes from him recently about the Liverpool move breaking down. He said, if you surround yourself with the wrong people, it comes off badly on you. I mean, there has been some suggestion that maybe it wasn't just the injury problem that put Liverpool off. Do you have any idea if there was maybe some other reason that possibly the deal broke down? Because, I mean, just looking at those comments, it seems slightly odd that it would just be the injuries and then he'd come out and say something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that the injury aspect of it was played up a lot. I've seen moves go ahead for players with bigger injury histories than Nabil Fekir. But there's also been questions asked in the past about the entourages of some of the players who have come through the ranks at Lyon. I mean, it's not exclusive to Lyon. There's a lot of players who have come through various clubs. I mean, look at Adrien, for example, coming through at PSG. Everybody's spoken a lot about his mother's role in his career, and people thought it would go away when he moved to Juventus, and then just last week it kind of flared up again with France exiting Euro 2020 and his mum playing quite a vocal role in the stands. So I definitely think that this is something that we have seen before and probably will see again in French football, where the people surrounding Fekir were not necessarily the kind of people that a big European club like Liverpool would necessarily want to get involved in. Karim Benzema has been in major trouble in the past because of people that he's been associated with growing up in Lyon. Similar has been said of Houssem Aouar as well, and the mental impact that those people around him have had in the wake of a big transfer deal falling through.
And in terms of the injuries itself, if we assume there's at least an element of truth in that side of it, was there a history of injuries at Lyon? And it doesn't seem to me like since he's gone to Real Betis, there's been a lot of injuries. It kind of felt like it was a risk that Liverpool didn't feel they could take, but maybe if they had have taken it, it would have been all right.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I think that the injury side of things was really played up a lot. There's always been question marks about his consistency, discipline as well. He is prone to picking up cards, but I think it's that capricious nature of his form, that will be one of the biggest turnoffs. And I think when people saw, how he pretty much down tools when moves in the past have not come off, that's definitely a big alarm bell, for some big European clubs. And perhaps it was a combination of all of that, that prompted Liverpool to pull the plug so late in the day.
And just finally then, I mean, Fekir would have been pretty much the like-for-like replacement for Philippe Coutinho, who'd obviously gone to Barcelona. I mean, those would have been pretty big boots to fill. He's maybe not quite lived up to expectations whilst he's been in Spain. Do you think he would have been capable of replacing Coutinho had Liverpool got that transfer right if they'd have gone for it?
I think there would have definitely been days where people would feel like they'd found the right replacement. I'm just not sure that he would have been able to perform at the consistent level that would have been expected of him. I have doubts that he would have relished the physicality of the Premier League and the speed of the game. I actually think that, had he really thought more about the move and had a lot of interest not being killed off with that Liverpool move falling through, that actually perhaps a slower European league like in Italy might have suited him better, because it puts less emphasis on those physical sides of the game and would allow him to delve more into the technical side of his game in which he is extremely gifted at. So obviously things haven't worked out quite as hoped with Betis, but also at the same time, Betis now under Manuel Pellegrini is sort of coming into a new era. They're looking to get themselves back towards the top reaches of the European game, and perhaps Fekir can play a part of that. Just the frustrating thing, and it was the same for Lyon fans, it'll be the same for Betis fans now, is that he is not a player, who you can guarantee to get 8 out of 10 top quality performances out of. It's more sort of a 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10, best case scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. One that we'll always look back on and wonder, what if it had happened? But of course, it didn't. Jonathan Johnson, thank you very much for your time. I won't keep you any longer, but really appreciate your insight there.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Interesting stuff. Well, it just goes to show that even when it looks like it's completely done, you do need to wait for that Melwood lean, or Kirby lean, as it would be these days. Nabil Fekir was the man who nearly signed for Liverpool, and how differently things might have panned out since then had he signed, we can only speculate. What we do know is that Liverpool's formation and their style would have been completely different, and it just goes to show really that even at a club as well run and as thorough as Liverpool, sometimes the best plans are those that come about completely by accident. That's all we've got time for here, though, on the latest Blood Red podcast. Thanks to all of my guests for their brilliant insight. And thanks to you, of course, too, for watching and for listening. Until next time, though, I've been Matt Addison, and it's goodbye for now.